2 minutes being in.
That means we can't say anything about anything. There are lots of people coming into the waiting room. All right, I'm going to start letting people in now, everybody.
Yep.
Here we go. Welcome to the people who are entering the room at the moment. I'll keep letting people in for the next couple of minutes. For all you who are here now, there should be a closed caption option on the bottom of your screen. So hopefully you'll be able to see that, and you can then allow the captions. I'll just take a couple more minutes to let people arrive into the room. So just a couple more minutes while we wait for the last people to arrive. All right, I might start my introductions, and my trusty assistant Madeleine will let people in if they arrive while I. Okay, so welcome everybody to this very special event at Avid Reader. It's the first time we've used closed captions. So if you see the little button that says closed captions on the bottom, make sure you click view closed captions. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on in this area. It's the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any other elders who are here tonight. And I'd also like to acknowledge that because this is the Zoom world, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people all over Australia. And I'd like to say that this is and always was Aboriginal land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And we feel very grateful to be able to continue a storytelling tradition that has been going on for millennia on this land. So tonight, it's very exciting to be hosting this event, The Shape of Sound by Fiona Murphy. And of course, it's our very first closed caption event, and that seems to be working really well. So if you've just arrived, you can click the closed captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen and allow that to be viewed. You will all be on silent for the duration of this event, but you will be able to use the chat function. And in fact, that is where you will be able to ask questions towards the end of the event. Any questions that you have at any time during the event, you can send them straight to me, and at the end of the event, I can ask Fiona your question. So it's with great delight that I am going to introduce Jessica White. Jessica White is an author and an academic living on Ghana country. She has published 2 novels, A Curious Intimacy and Entitlement, and a hybrid memoir about deafness called Hearing Maud, which won the Michael Crouch Award for a debut work of biography and was shortlisted for 4 major literary awards. Jessica's short stories and essays have appeared widely in Australian and international literary journals, and she has taken residencies at the B.R. Whiting Studio in Rome and the Wentworth Centre in Munich. And I am terribly jealous of her biography. She's also a very dear friend of Avid. We miss her very much. She co-edits Science Right Now, a journal of creative writing inspired by science. Everybody will.
Thank you, Krissy, for the lovely introduction. Yes, I'm speaking to you from Ghana country in Adelaide. I just moved here to start a new job, and I do miss you all very dearly as well. So I'm so happy that you're hosting this event, and that I can interview, be in conversation with Fiona Murphy. So I just acknowledge that I'm speaking from Ghana country as well, and acknowledge the traditional custodians, Australia's oldest storytellers. I think it's really important that we read the words of our First Nations peoples. So I'm very excited to be talking about this fabulous, gorgeous book, The Shape of Sound, written by Fiona Murphy. And Fiona is a deaf poet and essayist, and her work has been published in Kill Your Darlings, Overland, Griffith Review, and The Big Issue, among other publications. In 2019, she was awarded the Overland Fair Australia Essay Prize and the Monash Undergraduate Creative Writing Prize. In 2018, she was shortlisted for the Richell Prize and highly commended by the Wheeler Centre Next Chapter program. And that's a really stellar start to a career. And from that, we've got this incredible, gorgeous book, The Shape of Sound. And through what I see as essays spliced with memoir, Fiona relates what happens to a deaf body when it is forced to conform to the hearing world. She uses the language of the body to make visible the strain and exhaustion of not only trying to hear, but of trying to accommodate other, often abled bodies that are insensitive and impatient. She reveals the corrosiveness of a society that denigrates people with deafness and disability, and narrates her careful, brave, and steady progression towards finding and accepting her deaf self. And in doing so, she makes an invisible disability visible in precise and poetic ways. So this evening you're in the company of 2 deaf writers. So I lost my hearing from meningitis when I was 4, and that's what I write about in Hearing Maud. And to have 2 deaf writers in one place is very rare. So what I'm hoping is that after tonight you'll leave with an understanding of the range of ways in which deafness can be narrated. And that, of course, you're going to dash off and buy Fiona's book, which I recommend that you do. So I want to start at the beginning of the book because it opens with this metaphor, and Fiona writes, "In music, the lifespan of a sound is described in the following sequence: attack, decay, sustain, and release." And people often think that deafness and music can't go together because one stereotypically represents silence and the other stereotypically represents sound. So I was wondering, Fee, if you can tell us why you begin with this description of sound and why you use it to structure your book, because each section is named after this sequence. You've got attack, decay, sustain, and release. So what does sound mean to you in terms of music, in terms of the way you interpret the world?
It means so many things. Thank you for that gorgeous, lovely, warm welcome. And I'm really excited that we're both deaf because, as you said, this doesn't often happen, which is really great. And I'm zooming in from the lands of the Dara people from the Gundungurra country. In terms of the structure, that came quite late in the writing of the book. I had always envisioned the book to be segmented into sections because I wanted to create a sense of white space or white noise within the project itself, because I never, even though it's a memoir, I had never thought of my life and the events of understanding deafness necessarily in chronological order. It was something that I kind of circled around or avoided completely. So to me, it was never a linear narrative. So I wanted to give it a structure that kind of was almost physical in its essence. And initially, for the longest time, I used the elements of a sound wave to divide up the book. And it was a very scientific kind of structure, and it was about amplitude and velocity and frequency. And it kind of fit, but it never really gelled and worked. And it was only really kind of sifting through the sort of elements in the essays that I realized that I kept circling around the concept of sound and silence and what is sound. And a quote by the composer Debussy really kept coming into my head, Claude Debussy, of music is the silence between notes. And I thought that's really what I'm trying to get at, is that music wouldn't exist unless there was silence in it. And by the same token, I have such a deep relationship with music, and I was always quite obsessed with music. And it was only as I started to lose my hearing, I felt like that relationship started to become a little bit fractured because of how other people perceive deaf people and their relationship to music. So it really became quite at the end of the project, I realized, actually, I want to reclaim my love of music and kind of subvert the idea that deafness is just silence, and kind of show that music and sound and silence, it's all extremely physical and present, and it's more than just noise. It's a full whole body experience of taste and sight, and there's embodiment and a complexity to it. So it was it just kind of clicked into place and made sense at the end. But it was interesting how all these elements were something that I was striving to achieve just really fit in neatly to the attack, decay, sustain, and release.
Yeah, what you just said then made me wonder if a deaf body experiences music differently to a hearing body, because I know I feel bass sounds coming up through the floor through my body. And that's what attracts me when I go out to a nightclub. I can feel the beat, and I can't hear a lot. Like, it's just noise. It doesn't do anything for me. But I think there's at one point in your book you talk about the whole body being an ear for whatever's going on around you, which I thought was true. Yeah, I definitely feel that as well. But we're not visibly deaf. Like, we don't have that stereotypical marker of deafness, which is a speech impediment. So I was wondering if you could clarify for the audience how you do hear things. Like, what do you hear and what don't you hear? Yeah.
This was something that I really learned during the research, because my experience of sound is so entwined into my body and living that I thought I knew what deafness was, and I thought I knew what hearing was. And for years I thought I know what it is. But it was only when I started researching that I actually learned how hearing works.
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of how my experience of sound is that typically when people have two ears, it allows the brain to have two kind of pieces of information that it puts together to give almost a 3D image of the world. So people with intact hearing can locate where objects are, how far away it is, even the size of an object. So whether it's a small thing dropping to the floor or something larger. So there's almost kind of a real shape to how people typically hear. Whereas when I hear things, everything is at the same level, and I have no idea unless I'm looking where sounds are. Something could be right next to me or 20 meters back, and I just have no concept if I'm looking where any sounds come from, whether it's a voice or footsteps or anything like that. So my experience of sound is one of heightened awareness and unease. So I actually really love silence, because silence means that there's nothing going to walk up behind me and nothing can, happen. So when a room is quiet and I'm alone, it means that my body is relaxed and I'm aware of literally the geography of the room. Whereas if there's multiple people or competing sounds and background noise, I'm having to constantly think through what's actually happening in that space. And so it is an experience of kind of fatigue and exhaustion, that kind of processing and thinking through.
When people just don't understand how hard you're working just to stay upright like most of the time. And
that decision making. So even when speaking to people, when you're losing your hearing, and as I'm progressively losing more of my hearing, it isn't the whole word that gets softer. So it isn't as if the volume's being turned down, but rather it's like words disintegrate and fall apart, because individual letters, consonants, sounds, they start slipping out of words. So it's almost like language is put through a sieve, and we're just kind of capturing what's available and piecing it back together. So it's not about things getting softer, it's about sounds dropping out completely and almost becoming a description I kept coming up, seeing in other deaf writing, is that sounds become muddy, and it's quite a visual metaphor of, which is something I didn't realize that I do a lot, is whenever I'm describing sound, more often than not, it's either a physical feeling or a visual metaphor of words become muddy and you're straining to see what the other person's saying, because that's part of often the deaf experience, is you're using your eyes to gather information.
Yeah, I think I maintain that all deaf people are poets, because when poets put words together, they are encouraging the reader to make the connections themselves, and that's what deaf people do every day with just a few fragments of words. Yeah. But you mentioned earlier, like sitting in a room and feeling safe because nothing's going to kind of intrude and grab your attention in that room. And a lot of what you write about in the book is about architecture. And you had this fascinating account of Winston Churchill and the design of the Chamber of Debate, was it? Comments, that's it, in Parliament House. So can you talk briefly about Churchill and the architecture of that room, because that's something that not many people will have encountered in their understanding of Churchill.
That was originally, I came to even thinking about Churchill was from his quite renowned quote of first we build our buildings and then our buildings shape us. So it's been used widely in a lot of kind of discussions about kind of city planning and architecture. And I thought initially, that's quite true and quite interesting. But the more that I read and thought about that quote and Churchill, the more that there was something missing there, where I was thinking, it's quite strange that he is talking about bodies being bent out of shape in common areas, because talking to able-bodied friends, that doesn't seem to be an experience that they might necessarily have ever considered before, because the world is often designed for able-bodied people, so they almost glide or slide through the world. There's no friction, and it's these friction points is when you start to notice architecture for it being kind of difficult to access. So I was thinking, why is Churchill actually talking about this idea of friction and bending out of shape and being almost oppressed? It just didn't add up. And I can vividly remember I was still living in Melbourne. I was just kind of walking around Carlton, just about to pop into a bookstore. And I was like, oh my God, was he deaf? The idea, I don't know how it just came into my head. I was thinking that sounds like a deaf person who would have even put that idea into a sentence, because it's just so physical. And even how I'm describing it, I often feel like I'm either pressed against a wall or into a corner day after day. And that's just how I live. And I did more research into him, and he was during his kind of tenure as Prime Minister, he was progressively losing his hearing to the point where a lot of the other cabinet members had issues of communication with him, and he refused to make it public knowledge. He refused to wear hearing aids. When he did wear hearing aids, there was a lot of rumor that it was Russian spyware that he was wearing, and it became an issue for him to be seen as deaf. So there's only one known photograph that I could find of him actually wearing hearing aids. But he admitted it from all his biographies. It was something that he just refused to contend with. Yet interestingly, when the Commons chamber, after the Blitz it was completely flattened and they had to rebuild it, which is why he was talking about architecture in the first place. He wanted it to be built exactly the same way, but the only thing that changed in the redesign was the acoustics of the building. He made sure that the acoustics were improved. So essentially, he was building a space that suited his body. And I just found it really fascinating that these are decisions that are made by people in power. And if there were more people with disability in positions of influence and power, those friction points and inaccessibility will melt away. But until that happens, bodies are still going to be bent out of shape.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just the architecture of buildings; it's the architecture of our society. And one of the most, I thought, heartrending parts of this book is that we see your body bent out of shape and what it does to you, to the point where you don't want to tell anyone that you're deaf, and that has been that's carried on for most of your life. It's only changed in the last couple of years. So what was it that made you want to hide your deafness? Well, we call it passing. I call it faking it. So you wanted to pass as a hearing person. What was it that made you want to do that?
It was mainly, it didn't feel, for the longest time, it didn't feel like I had a choice not to.
Yeah.
So it was almost an easy decision had been made for me of, I won't be accepted if I'm openly deaf, because people will assume less of me and treat me differently. When I started to come into my deaf identity later on, the dilemma became, will people believe me? Because I had become so good at passing or faking that I was too good to be deaf, because I'd learned to hide or downplay any confusion and difficulty. And I didn't have, as you were saying, any of those visual cues that would indicate that I was telling the truth. So I became really concerned about the idea of what is truth telling, what is lying. And even when writing the book, I really kind of grappled with that concept of what is secrecy, and was I telling a lie? Was I keeping a secret? Are they the same thing, or are they different things? And I came to the conclusion in the end, once I was in a proud position with my deaf identity, that it was really survival and just trying to get through as easily as possible. And I'm confident now to explain that I am deaf. And I do actually have markers of being deaf, but it's not what most people think of saying hearing technology or having a certain accent when I speak.
Yeah. You mentioned this idea of secrecy, and one of the most wonderful lines is the book is, you say the average person has 13 secrets. And then you talk about the research around this, and that the idea that having a secret physically weighs you down. So I was wondering if you could talk about if you could describe the impact of holding on to the secret of your deafness and what it did to your body in the book, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that this is quite telling of my biases. When I started thinking about secrets, I automatically thought of what kind of the physicality of that would be as almost a condition. And I went to the research base straight away to kind of look at the scientific literature. And there's this incredible body of research of the physical implications of having secret. And it is a physical burden that we carry. And when we share our secrets with other people, so when we confide in other people, our burden lightens. But it's interesting that if you disclose information to a trusted friend, they actually pick up some of the burden. So it's this interesting almost kind of transference of this burden of information. And when I was initially thinking about even what it means to be deaf, my secret was constricting me so much that I couldn't even physically write those words on a page. I couldn't write the sentence, my name's Fiona Murphy, I'm deaf. I was that kind of restricted and afraid, and my fear response was so high of the possibility of like secreting my secret. So it's almost that idea of, if your secret's coming to the surface, there's a lot of research to show that your body will try and repress it as much as possible and almost hide it from your mind. And it's when you're alone doing mundane tasks like washing the dishes, taking the dog for a walk, your brain knows that I'm just going to check, is that secret still there? And it will go back, and then your secret will pop up in those moments where you're doing mundane things and you're safe and unguarded. So your secret almost haunts you. And I had been experiencing that more and more when I was getting to the point of wanting to let go of my secret. It kept popping up of like, my deafness was this real thing that was haunting me. And during the writing process, I really had to pull up a lot of courage and information to get to the point that I could confidently write about it, let alone talk to other people. So it was almost this extremely long process of shedding my secret and the weight of it, to the extent that how I physically feel now is miles away of how I used to feel and perceive my deafness. There was a real heaviness and a feeling of being trapped and restricted, whereas now it's just like a boundless sort of opening, kind of a really expansive feeling. So I'm just relieved to have gone through that really, really hard stage. It's so lovely to be on this side of it.
Because you refer to it often through the book, this terrible fear, and you write, my fear feels corporeal, so full of consequence, and you can understand it because if you do disclose that you have a disability, then there's ramifications. There's poor employment outcomes. There's ostracism. You're earning less than your able-bodied counterparts, and you're disrespected. And again, people don't believe you. I've found that often, and people just don't think. You think, oh, you can speak well, so therefore you're just like anyone else. I was like, well, no, I've had years and years of speech therapy, and I work like a dog. That's how I get to the point where I'm functioning like anyone else, and I have chronic fatigue. So, in the book you can literally see you in this bind, like there's terror on both sides, and you get to the point where part of you literally breaks. So I was wondering if you could talk about that point where part of your hand snaps off, pretty much. Yeah.
It's just, before I talk about that, it's so true. Everything that you just described then of the actual ramifications, they're real, and they affect so many people with any form of disability, particularly invisible disabilities. The idea around, are you capable? Are you telling the truth? Are you worthy? Can we trust you? There's a real sort of distrust about invisible disability, which I think really plays into the self-surveillance on yourself of like, am I passing? Am I good enough? Am I worthy for this job? There's kind of tripping over it. In terms of piece of me snapping off. I can highly recommend everyone buy non-slip matting for their bathtub showers. A nice physio tip and life tip in general, because if you're singing Stevie Wonder songs in a bathtub shower, you may slip and you may fracture your wrist, which I did. Thankfully, I didn't break a leg. I'm so grateful I didn't break a leg, because that would have, I don't know what I would have done. That would have been a very awkward ambulance pickup. So I slipped in the shower and I broke my wrist, and I had pins and plates put in, and I was progressing quite well. I had previously broken wrists before. I treated many people with broken wrists. I was kind of quite au fait and fine with it until a couple of weeks after the operation, the tendon to my thumb severed and snapped. And so my thumb was just hanging loosely. And as a physio friend pointed out, oh my God, that looks dead. And it did look dead. I had no function over it at all. It was just kind of flopping, hanging off my hand, and I would get it caught in my hair. And it was, yeah, it was pretty floppy. So I needed to get that surgically repaired. And then I actually, because I had a tendon transfer from one finger to the thumb, I then had to relearn how to use my thumb as a thumb, which is a really specific job of the hand. The thumb has to do a lot of functional things like buttoning buttons and zips, and that took so long. It was months and months and months of hand therapy. And around that time, coincidentally, Auslan interpreters were becoming a lot more commonplace in performance theatre and the arts. And I was seeing them really crop up all throughout Melbourne in particular. And so my interactions with seeing deafness in mainstream society was happening more and more. So I was becoming interested in that. Initially, I was quite confronted and quite jealous of, like, oh my God, I wish I knew sign language. That would be incredible. And I was kind of like, the penny hadn't dropped yet that this could be something that would change my life, until I was getting towards the end of my rehab process with my thumb. And I decided maybe this could be a good way of building the strength up in my hands. And I started to attend Auslan signing classes. And I still at that stage didn't think I was deaf enough to know sign language. So I was still very much focused on being a good physio kind of patient and doing all the right things. And it was only when I started attending Auslan meetups with other people that I shockingly realized that it's an incredible language that is so useful. And that level of exhaustion that I initially felt being in public spaces, of having to really contort my body to hear well and communicate, melted away. And I could actually be in the center of a room and being able to engage in a conversation, not fluently, because I'm still not fluent with sign language, but without that idea of having to really reach out and try and connect with someone so desperately. It just wasn't there. And yeah, I still get like shivers, because it was just like this real feeling of like coming home.
Yeah. And I think as writers, we're conditioned to find meaning in our lives. But it seems like it's more than poetry. The fact that your part of your hand snapped, and then the way of recovering yourself was taking you back to your deaf identity, or opening that door to a deaf identity. It's kind of like your body is speaking a language. But I think it's, and that's one of the most beautiful things about the book, the way you talk about the metaphors of the body. And you open with this gorgeous description that you're talking about how the body is a disjointed poem of mixed metaphors and similes. So the spinal cord lashes out in a wild tangle, cordia equina, the horse's tail, and blood flows through the heart's atrium, the communal space in ancient Roman houses where the hearth burned hot and bright. So it's just gorgeous all the way through. You've used that language. So you're aware of the poetry of the body, but at the same time, because you're trained as a physiotherapist, you were trained to see the body as in a particular way, and that's just something that has to be fixed, which is this medical model of the body. And one of the most striking things in the book I found was when you come to writing and you learn to write about or see your body in a different way, and that's through the comedy workshop. So can you talk briefly about what that workshop leader did to make you see your body differently?
Yeah, that was another chance, kind of lucky encounter that only looking back on I can see had such a profound influence on my sense of self and identity. So I had been living in Melbourne and been doing some creative writing for fun, and I got an email land in my inbox about a comedy writing workshop. And I thought, yes, I've been so like down in the dumps with my broken hand. I want to laugh and I want to like learn how to be lighthearted and humorous again. So I went along, and it was for disabled women. And at that stage, I had started to become kind of started to see myself as having a disability. I didn't see myself as being deaf at that point because, again, I had this idea if I wasn't fluent in sign language and I didn't really know any deaf people, I'm obviously not a deaf person. But maybe because I've got less hearing, maybe I'm a disabled person. So I attended, but I still didn't feel incredibly comfortable in that space because I hadn't accepted that level yet. And I didn't think other people would accept that of me either, particularly having an invisible disability. So I felt incredibly self-conscious in that environment for quite a while. And it was about a 6-week program, 6 to 8 weeks, where it turned out to be stand-up comedy, which was quite a shock to me. And I was like, holy heck. I like brought my notepad and I wanted to sit at a desk. Like, I don't want to stand up in front of people. This is too much. But I'm like such a stickler. So I was like, I'm going to stick this out, even if this is like really painful. I'm here, I'm going to attend. And through the exercises week after week, the beautiful, wonderful facilitator was really talking about the idea of our medical story and what is our actual real story. What is our life story? So we may have all these definitions and labels and conditions that are portrayed with certain language in a certain way by the medical industry and field. But we have our lives and our stories, and what is it that we actually want to say, and how should we describe our body and our interests and our way of being? And it was this real shift in realizing that even though I was quite hesitant to use the labels deaf and disabled, I had still been using a lot of medical thinking in my mind of like, am I this category or am I this category? I really wanted to put myself into a box, or I wouldn't let myself be put into a box. It was very label driven, but I wasn't really thinking about who I am as an individual. And it was really being in that group of really empowered, incredible disabled women. I started to see people be proud of their bodies and display a sense of authority and ownership of their identity and disability. And it was just so invigorating to be in a proud disabled environment that my identity and sense of self just again expanded and expanded. And there were so many possibilities there that long before I developed a sense of deaf pride and a deaf identity, I really started to become part of the disability community. And even though I had those apprehensions of not being welcomed, I was so welcomed. Mm-hmm. And some of my dearest friends are part of the disability community. And it really makes me passionate now to make sure that people with disabilities are aware that being in the community and having friends and allies and support can really enrich your life. And it's hilarious. Like their jokes were just staggeringly good and just so funny. And the amount of ownership over their stories just inspired me to strive towards that in my own life as well.
Yeah, you talk about craptions. These are not craptions tonight. These are quite good, but these are really good. But yeah, when you have automatic craptions on the news, it's like I gave up watching the news. There's like because I write, and there's spelling mistakes in the caption. So you just get so caught up and so angry with the spelling mistakes, you don't watch the news. Yeah. But you talk about the importance of connecting. So not just not just writing about a new self and meeting people in the community, but reading. And there's this really important point towards the end of the book where you encounter the words of the disabilities scholar Rosemary Garland Thompson. And she says that we, as disabled people, should not be trying to live a non-disabled life. We should be living our own lives. And then you say that this comment that she makes, quote, allowed me to clearly see the vast and shocking amount of mental space I devoted to trying to be non-disabled, which really struck a chord with me too, because I have spent so long and so much time trying to work out how can I be acceptable to other people. But it also reminded me of the time when I was in London. I was doing my PhD thesis on Maud Parade, and I was like, I'm going to find some books about deaf history. And I can vividly recall going to that library and getting the books out. It's like, oh my God, there's so much to read. And so the words connect you to a community. So I was wondering, did you have that same sensibility? You talk about moving from reading quantitative research about facts and statistics to qualitative research about stories. So did that inform your shift as well in trying to find out who you were as a deaf person?
Absolutely. I should say definitely reading has influenced so much my understanding. Long before I felt confident to enter the deaf community, I tried to read about it as much as possible because I didn't want to be in the position of cultural appropriation. That's how much I had been influenced by the medical model. Even though I'm profoundly deaf in one ear, losing hearing in the other ear, I still didn't feel like, can I call myself deaf? So it's such an oppressive influence these labels have, despite the varied experience that most people have with hearing loss. It's on a continuum rather than a specific category. In terms of reading and research, your book, it's stunning and beautiful. It was an incredible time that I could read this when I was still working on my book, and I could see how you so skillfully wove in archive research and the idea of deaf history into your writing in such a beautiful way that it really inspired me to think about deafness more holistically. Because at that stage I was thinking I had my science hat on and I was all stats and figures and labels and diagnosing, and it was my real health science background, but I hadn't thought about feelings and emotions, which I don't often think about, which probably sounds a bit cold, but so I love science so much, but I really started to think about where are these other deaf stories and how do other people experience their deafness and their emotions. So another book that I found and went to was by the wonderful Donna MacDonald, The Art of Being Deaf, and memoir is absolutely gorgeous. And the way she writes about the deaf experience, again, just opened my mind up. And forever obsessed with going into scientific journals, I did go into the qualitative research journals, which is really just another word of storytelling. I went into kind of the science of how people express themselves about in long form interviews about their deaf experience. And that's when I really started to see so many similarities between what I assumed were fixed personality traits in myself of being organized and liking things to be scheduled and on time, and to be written down, and to be really clear and concise. And I'm really into having my day timetabled, and any deviation from that, I kind of feel a bit of friction towards. And I just thought I was this kind of A-type personality, really rigid. And I didn't realize their coping mechanisms with deafness. And it was seeing that other people with deafness kind of create these structures and controls in their day and their life and their experience, because they're just trying to cope and conserve their energy in a hearing world that asks so much of us day after day, that these are ways of just creating, as you so lovely, you have said before, creating deaf time. So time to be alone, to decompress, and just be deaf without having to be hearing is so important. So to read that just opened my mind.
Yeah. I read, I think I read an early version, and then I reread your book for taking notes for tonight and to do a review. And then I realized, oh God, there's so many similarities. Like when you're talking to someone and they turn away and you stop talking because they're being rude, they're not looking at you. Things like that. I do that all the time. And then that stupid game Marco Polo, and you can't find anyone because you can't hear where they are. Well, you can't sense the distance. And then getting sick all the time because you're so stressed, like flu after flu after flu. I've had that all the time. And then someone attacking you from behind because you couldn't hear where they were. That's happened to me. And being organised, and then concentrating so much on your home life. Because that's where you recover. But then you even said, like tilting your head on the side like a bird. I do that all the time. So I'm trying to work out what you're saying. It was just weird. And then I realised by the time I got to the end, and I read Donna's book as well. And Donna launched my book. Donna's wonderful. But I don't think I had the same level of pattern recognition as when I read yours. And then I got to the end of it, I thought, I'm not an outlier. I'm just like a different species, or we're a different species. We're just plants. So, yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I have to say, just to let everyone know, that Jess and I have had many conversations. I'm really, really lucky to have her as a mentor. Yeah. And every time that we chatted about my book and deafness in general, we would always have this light bulb moment of going, you do that too? Oh my God, that's not just me. That's like a really interesting one that I think mirrors both of our experiences in the world, is that we both get bored really easily, and we like to be challenged professionally, and we like things happening, and this sense of not being static and just kind of progressing with things. And I think that kind of comes back to that idea of that we are so mentally engaged in every interaction with other people that it quite easily can feel like it's being disengaged and lazy and kind of bored, when as soon as things are kind of like nothing's happening, like there's that mundane day after day, because I think you almost become addicted to this sense of like alertness and like, right, what's next? Okay, what's the next challenge? I'm all over this. And I think that I suspect that's a real kind of deafness that's coming out of us, of like wanting to strive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But the other really eerie thing, and I will open to questions after this, was that sense of isolation. And you talk about it being in your blood. And you write about, you say, even when warmly ensconced with company, loneliness lingers. The physical memory of it remains fresh, easily accessible, a cauterized edge on a deep cellular level. Even when I am not actively feeling lonely, I know that loneliness is still in my blood. And I've felt that too, and I've tried to explain it to people, and I've felt it when I've seen a group of deaf people signing and I can't join in, and it's just heartbreaking. You realise what you've missed out on your whole life. And I mentioned to you earlier when I was emailing you that Sophia Golem, the deaf filmmaker, who is the daughter of Jean Bedford and Peter Corris, talks about it too. She wrote about it in an article in 2003, and that was the first time I connected with another deaf person. I thought, oh my God, you're feeling it too. It's just like complete detachment from the rest of the world, and it never goes away. And it doesn't mean that it's negative. It just means it's there. You're isolated all the time, and I just don't know if other people feel that as well. But it was really striking. That was a point of connection for me. I was like, oh my God, it just envelops you all the time. And it's there when you think about it. I guess a bit like tinnitus. It's just always present.
And it's really interesting that in that section that you read out about on a deep cellular level, that has been scientifically proven that loneliness does change the viscosity and kind of cellular, the way our blood runs through our body. It really does change who we are.
Yeah.
And that doesn't leave us, even when we are with friends and family, of that knowledge within ourselves that we carry loneliness with us. Again, so that's the deaf thing. When you get tired, words start falling out of your mouth.
Yeah, that's right. I do that too. Don't worry.
I think that is a very specific deaf experience of isolation and yearning, because you know that the communication isn't as smooth and fluid as it could be.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel that too when I see fluent signers. Is just that my body just craves that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So this book was amazing. Yeah, it made me feel less alone. It's the poetry was gorgeous, and your perspectives as a physiotherapist I thought were really, really valuable as well. So thank you. That was wonderful. We've got about 10 minutes for questions in case the audience has anything they'd like to ask Fee. You can type your questions into the chat box and Krissy will read them out for us.
We do have some questions already.
Okay,
so
good.
This. Vicky says, it was a real strain to have to keep my hearing aids in during the night when my kids were little and I was a single mum, because I was conscious of noises but couldn't identify them. So I was pretty scared all night, every night. Agree, it's very, very tiring to have to concentrate on so hard on hearing what's around me too, especially conversation, especially when it's particularly hard to hear. And I thought I'd read that out. I know it's not a question, but it's something that I hadn't thought about, that kind of parenting and needing to kind of hear your child.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vicky, for saying that. I think parenting and hearing loss is an area that is often not discussed. So that's really fabulous that you shared that.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of sharing as well as questions in amongst them. So I will read this out too, because it's really interesting too. And it's from Rebecca. I've only just been diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder at the age of 40 and have been so aware of sounds nobody would notice and vibrations in the body since I was a baby. The brain struggles with processing auditory things when in overload. Closed captions have made a huge difference in my life, and so much of what you were talking about this evening really stands out to me. You're speaking about invisible deafness, echoes mirroring in autistic women quite a bit. Also, It is a bit of a contradiction in a way, but I'm unable to focus on physical books, and so is your book available on audio, I assume.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought that up as well, because auditory processing is, again, an area that's not often discussed, and that fatigue that goes into deciphering sound is immense. And that was one thing that I really strove to try and dispel in my book, is the idea that listening isn't whether you just hear things, it's whether you can understand and comprehend. So even if you have hearing aids, you're still having to decipher sound. And with auditory processing as a condition that you experience, the level of work that you would do on a daily basis is immense. Whether the book is available in audio, don't believe it is available in audio at the moment, but there are ebooks as well, which might make the reading experience a little bit more accessible if you need to change font size and things like that, if you have an e-reader.
Right. I'm sure that it will get translated to audio at some point. I know that there are organisations that do that specifically for deaf libraries as well, so hopefully that will be soon. There's a lot of comments about how brilliant tonight is, including the closed captions. So thank you to Linda and David for doing such a great job tonight. Jane says it's brilliant having, sorry, that's just jumped up. It's brilliant having books like this out in the world. Hopefully we will find more inclusivity and workplaces, etc. Asking if anyone needs any adjustments. So not all the work has to be done by people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
And Breda says, I love the conversation between you both. Can you comment on whether you felt any pressure to not learn sign language? There can be a lot of medical warding language about not signing in case you lose your speech. It can be a struggle for people becoming deaf. I am the same, to resist the pressure.
That's such a great question. Personally, with my experience, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 6 years old. So I had already acquired speech at that stage. And because I had acquired speech, I was considered to be very successful as a deaf person, even though I was completely illiterate and had struggled to learn how to read. In the medical model, I was successful. I could fit into society, brilliant. Didn't matter, I couldn't read. And sign language was at that stage, and is still unfortunately very much considered as the last resort, despite there being a tremendous amount of solid research to show that it aids brain development in the same way as any language. All brains need language. They need it quickly and in the best means possible. So regardless of the degree of hearing loss any child has, they must have access to language, and sign language just allows that brain to develop and grow without those barriers and friction in place, which spoken language can often create for children with hearing loss.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience was similar. I was 4 and speaking by the time I was deaf, and we were just so far from anywhere in the country that no one even signed. My parents had no idea what to do. So, and that's common for deaf children born into hearing families. The families want them to be the same as them so they can communicate with them. So neither of us had any deaf role models to look up to anyway. Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic too, just from a personal note, listening to the quote about Churchill and the idea of the world and the world not being made for all bodies and all people. And as a woman living in a fat body, you can't go into shops. So you want to come shopping? No, don't, because I can't actually purchase anything in the shop that fits me, or not being able to go to public toilets because you can't fit into it. I thought that it was really interesting that there are parallels for people in the community too. I think I'm gone through the questions. Sorry, there's a lot of comments here. But I think that we are close to finishing anyway. And I think that this has been an incredible conversation between the two of you. This book, The Shape of Sound by Fiona Murphy, I suggest that everyone rush out and buy it. I've put a link in there for people that if you want to buy it from Avid Reader, I do hope to do. And also Hearing Maud is one of our favourites as well. And we always have copies of Hearing Maud on the shelf. So do racing and purchase a copy of Hearing Maud as well. It has been a fabulous conversation. I'm so grateful to listen to you both. And thank you very much for the closed caption technique you provided those. And there's lots of thank yous coming through now.
Oh.
So thank you to both of you. It's been really
wonderful.
So,
thank you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much, both of you. I'll end the meeting.
Thank you. Bye. Yeah.